The groom went down between one breath and the next. One moment he was laughing, champagne glass lifted, string quartet playing something sweet and forgettable, and then gravity claimed him. His body folded in on itself the way bodies do when the machine inside stops cooperating. The glass hit the marble floor and the sound cut through everything. A woman shrieked, chairs scraped back. Someone kept calling his name like a man shouting into a well, hoping the echo would bring something back. I was standing 10 feet away, holding a service tray I had no memory of picking up. For a full second, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once, people surging forward, kneeling, hovering, talking over each other in that particular panic that looks like action but accomplishes nothing. Someone tried to lift his shoulders. Someone else held a phone to their ear, calling for help without saying anything useful. I saw his face from where I stood, gray, lips already edging toward blue. Something in me shifted, something old, something I had spent years covering with dirt. I stepped forward. "Back off, you're just a dishwasher." The words hit hard enough to stop me for half a heartbeat. I didn't look up to find the face that said them. I'd heard versions of that sentence before, delivered in different registers, boardrooms, hallways, official correspondence, but always carrying the same meaning. You don't belong here, you lost that right. They weren't wrong. But his breathing was all wrong. I set the tray down somewhere, I think on a chair, and dropped to my knees beside him. "Move," I said quietly, not a command, just a certainty. Nobody listened at first, not until my hands found his jaw and tilted his head back with a precision that had nothing to do with dishwater. The room hesitated, then a voice cut through from somewhere behind me, low, unhurried, carrying the weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Give her space." People shifted, reluctantly, enough. 2 fingers pressed to his neck, pulse there but wrong, irregular, stuttering like a car engine trying to catch on a cold morning. I leaned close to his chest and listened, not just for breathing, for pattern. The rhythm wasn't simply weak, it was collapsing inward, folding on itself. "Call 911 again," I said, not looking up. "Tell them he's not breathing right, stay on the line." "I already called," someone snapped. "Then stay on the line," I repeated. I repositioned his airway and began counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. A memory fired without permission, bright lights, a steady monitor beep, a younger version of my hands moving over a different table with the same controlled purpose. I pushed it back. That was then. This was now. This man was now. I pressed down. "Hey, stop," I said, "back off." Someone was pulling at my shoulder. I didn't turn. "Unless one of you knows what you're doing, get back." No one answered that. I kept going, compression, breath, compression. I don't know exactly when the room went quiet. At some point the crowd's panic thinned into something different, not calm, but arrested. The kind of stillness that happens when people understand they are watching something they cannot improve. Then I heard it. A voice somewhere behind the circle, low and stunned. "Oh my God, it's her." I didn't look up, I didn't have time. 2 minutes later, sirens, the paramedics came in fast and practiced, their movements sharp and economical. They took over without ceremony. I answered their questions, timing what I'd observed, what I'd done, and they didn't ask who I was. That part didn't matter. Not anymore. As they wheeled him out, the room parted in silence. The celebration had drained from the air completely, replaced by something heavier and unnameable. I stayed on my knees for a moment longer than necessary, then I stood. My hands were trembling, I hadn't noticed until then. I walked toward the service corridor without making eye contact with anyone, wiping my palms on my apron out of habit more than hygiene. "Wait." His voice stopped me at the door. I turned. He was closer than I expected. Tall, even with age having worked its way into his shoulders, dark formal suit, silver-haired, the kind of face that had spent decades being read in dim briefing rooms and had learned to give nothing away. Except now it was giving something away, not fear, not even gratitude. Recognition. And beneath it, barely visible, something that looked like disbelief. "You don't remember me," he said. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I shook my head. It wasn't entirely true, but it was easier. He studied me the way a man studies a calculation that keeps coming out differently from what he expects. Then he nodded once slowly, as if something had been confirmed rather than resolved. "I remember you," he said. I didn't answer. What would I have said? I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. The noise hit me all at once, running wah. Clashing pans, voices colliding. Someone said they thought the groom was dead. Someone else was arguing about whether it was food poisoning. The kitchen had decided to move on the way kitchens always do. I went to the sink, turned the faucet to hot. The water ran over my hands and I let it. Steam rose, the edges of the room softened. Martha glanced at me once from across the kitchen, her expression doing that particular thing it did when she was deciding whether something was her business. Then she went back to directing her staff. That was Martha. She never asked questions people weren't ready to answer. In 3 years of working for her, it was the quality I appreciated most. I picked up a plate, started scrubbing. Same as before, same as always. But my hands didn't feel the same. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door I had kept bolted for years had opened, just a crack, and I didn't know what was standing on the other side of it. I stayed at the sink long after the last guests drifted out and the kitchen settled into its end-of-night rhythm. Plates came in slower, voices dropped, the adrenaline that had charged the room like weather was dissipating now, leaving something quieter in its place, uneasy, unfinished. No one mentioned what had happened in the ballroom, not directly, but I could feel it in the small adjustments people made around me, a glance held a beat too long, a sentence that started and then didn't. The hot water kept running. I scrubbed each plate with more attention than necessary, letting the small familiar motions anchor me. It was easier than thinking about the man on the floor, easier than thinking about the man who had recognized me. Oh my God, it's her. I dried my hands slowly and turned off the faucet. Then I went back to work. I used to be a trauma surgeon at a VA hospital outside Dayton. That's the kind of sentence that's supposed to carry weight, accomplishment, authority, earned respect. When I say it now, it feels more like something I'm reading off a file that belongs to a stranger, a record I can access but no longer claim. Back then my days started before sunrise and ended long after dark. I lived on bad coffee and rigid routine and the particular kind of purpose that fills every hour until there's no room left for anything else. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't designed to be. It was work that mattered, the kind where your decisions didn't just shape outcomes, they defined them. Most of my patients were veterans, men and women who arrived carrying things no chart could fully capture, visible injuries and invisible ones. I learned early that medicine at that level wasn't only about skill, it was about judgment, timing, and sometimes choices you couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been standing in the same room. That's how I met Daniel Mercer. He came in late one night, airlifted from a highway accident outside the city. Broadside collision with a truck that ran a red light. By the time they wheeled him in, he was already spiraling. Internal bleeding, head trauma, compromised airway, everything at once. I remember the moment they brought him through the doors, the way the room shifted not into chaos but into focus. Everyone knew their role, everyone moved with purpose. I took one look at him and understood we had no margin left for hesitation. Prep 2, we're going in now. There's a silence that settles over a surgical team right before the work begins, not the absence of sound, the absence of doubt. You trust the people around you, you trust your hands, you push everything else into a room you'll deal with later and close the door. That night, everything worked the way it was supposed to. We stabilized him, controlled the bleeding, repaired what we could and managed what we couldn't. When it was over, Daniel Mercer was still alive, barely, but alive. When I stepped out of the OR, a man was waiting in the hallway, tall, straight-backed, not pacing, not fidgeting, simply waiting with the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms where waiting was part of the work. He looked at me like I was holding something he needed. He began. He made it through surgery, I told him. The next 24 hours are critical. He nodded once, no visible relief, just a slight settling in his shoulders like a fraction of weight had shifted. Thank you, he said. I didn't think much of it. We saw families like that every day, What mattered was the patient. Daniel spent weeks in the ICU. Complications arrived and left, infections, setbacks, small victories that didn't always hold, but he fought. You could see it even when he was unconscious, the way his body kept refusing to surrender. I checked on him when I could, not because he was different from my other patients, but because he was exactly the kind of patient I had chosen this profession for. When he finally regained consciousness, there was no dramatic moment, no sudden clarity, just a quiet return to awareness, piece by piece, the way dawn comes not all at once but inevitable. The day that changed everything didn't feel different when it started. Tuesday, I remember because I had told myself I would leave before midnight. I had almost believed it. Around 8:30 p.m., 2 patients arrived within minutes of each other. One was Daniel. The other was not. The second patient was older, late 60s, no immediate family present, cardiac complications layered over an existing condition that had been declining for months. Both patients needed intervention. Both needed resources we did not have enough of. This is the part that gets left out of the cleaner versions of the story. Hospitals aren't designed for ideal conditions. They're designed for reality, and reality on that particular Tuesday night meant one available or the others occupied or being prepped, and one ventilator left in the unit. I stood in the corridor looking at 2 charts and understanding that I could not give everything to both. Which one? A resident asked. There are moments in this work when the world narrows to a single point and every decision you've ever made has been quietly preparing you for it. This was one of those moments. On paper, Daniel was the stronger bet, younger, fewer underlying complications, better projected survival odds with aggressive intervention. The other man, Earl Patterson, I know his name now the way you know the names of things that don't leave you. Earl was not expected to survive aggressive intervention, not given his history, not given where things stood. But paper doesn't hold everything. I remember looking at Earl when I first walked into his room. He wasn't frightened, he wasn't confused. He was simply present, watching me with the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have already made a certain peace. Make the call. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, not in uniform, just a suit, but you couldn't mistake the bearing. The man from the hallway outside the OR, the man who would become, in my mind, simply the general. He stepped inside. His voice was steady, but underneath it, something fragile. My son is in the other room. Daniel, that was the first time I heard his name spoken by someone who loved him. He's stable for now, I said, but he won't be if we delay. And the other patient. I held his gaze, critical, multiple complications. He looked at me, not the way frightened fathers look at doctors, the way someone looks when they already know what's coming and need to hear it said out loud anyway. Which one has a chance? He asked. Then quieter, barely above the noise of the floor, if it were your son, what would you do? That question has followed me through every room I've entered since. I made the call. By the time the night ended, 1 patient was stable, 1 was gone. I signed the report just before dawn, documented, moved on, that's what you do. At least that's what I thought. The investigation opened 2 weeks later. It moved with a speed I hadn't seen before, faster than most processes that claim to be thorough. Questions came before I expected them. Conclusions formed before answers were fully gathered. A narrative took shape that seemed to need very little from me. I was primarily useful as the person the story ended with. Medical negligence, improper allocation of resources, failure to follow protocol. I read those words over and over trying to find the seam where they matched what had actually happened. I couldn't find it, but accuracy had stopped being the point. Accountability needed a face. I was the one who had made the decision. The calculus was simple. I didn't fight it. People have asked me why, lawyers, reporters, even Martha once, in a moment she probably regretted. The answer was never simple. Part of it was exhaustion, part of it was knowing how these things tend to resolve and for whom, but the largest part was something I still struggled to say clearly. I wasn't certain I deserved to fight, not after the choice I'd made, not after Earl Patterson went home in a box while I walked out of the building with my hands intact. Silence felt like the honest response. The kitchen lights were off when I finished that night. The hallway was empty. Or it should have been. He was waiting in the corridor just beyond the swinging door, hands in his coat pockets, face unreadable in the dim light. The general. He didn't speak immediately, just watched me with that same measuring expression, like he was still trying to resolve something that didn't fit. "You were there," he said finally. "No," I replied. It came out before I could catch it, pure reflex. "You were," he said, softer. I shook my head, turned, and walked past him before he could say anything else. I didn't stop until I hit the parking lot. Cold air, quiet, my keys in my hand and no clear sense of where to drive them. Behind me, the building settled into silence. But nothing in me hadn't. For years I had convinced myself that what happened in that hospital was over, closed, filed away in a drawer that would never be opened again. Standing there in that empty lot, breathing cold air, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to before. It hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. I didn't go home right away. The engine ran, the headlights cut a pale line across the empty lot, but I sat there with my hands on the wheel and watched the light change in the windows of the building across the street until it didn't help anymore. You were there. I drove the long way home. No music, just road and memory and the particular quiet that lets old thoughts surface whether you've invited them or not. The next morning began identically to every other one. Coffee too weak, toast I didn't finish, the same worn jacket by the door, same road, same parking space, Martha's kitchen already alive and loud when I came through the back. Routine is armor, it keeps the past at a manageable distance. "You all right?" Martha asked, not looking up from her invoices. "Fine," I said. She held her gaze on me for exactly one beat too long, then nodded and went back to her papers. That should have been the end of it. By mid-morning the deliveries arrived, produce, glassware, linens. I moved through the rhythm of it without thinking, which was the goal, head down, hands busy, the morning becoming ordinary again. That's when I saw him. Not the general, someone else. He stood near the service entrance just inside the door, dressed in yesterday's suit with the tie gone and collar loosened. Early 30s, clean cut, he wore the look of a man who had not slept and didn't expect to anytime soon. His eyes moved across the room, searching, then they found me. I considered turning away. For a moment the option was still real. Then he started walking over. "Were you working the Mercer wedding last night?" The name landed somewhere tender. I kept my hands in the water. "Yes." "I was told," he paused, finding his words, "I was told you were the one who helped my brother." "Brother?" "Not the groom, not Daniel, brother." I dried my hands and turned to face him. "He's alive?" I asked. It came out quieter than I intended. He nodded. "They said if you hadn't stepped in when you did, he wouldn't have made it to the ambulance." I let that sit. "I'm glad," I said. He studied me. "You knew what you were doing. That wasn't basic first aid. You should talk to the paramedics." "They weren't there yet," he said. I held his gaze. "My father wants to speak with you," he added. There it was. "I'm working," I said. "It won't take long." "It usually does." He frowned slightly, then softer. "He thinks he knows you from somewhere." "People think that sometimes." "Not like this," he said. "He hasn't stopped asking about you since last night, whatever he saw in that ballroom." "I can't help him." The words came out more firmly than I meant them to. They hung between us for a moment. He didn't leave right away. He stood there quietly as if giving me a chance to reconsider. Then he said, "I don't know your full story, but I know what I saw. You saved my brother's life, that matters." I closed my eyes briefly, opened them. "It doesn't change anything," I said. "Maybe it should," he replied. "No," I said, "it shouldn't." He left a few minutes later, not angry, not satisfied, just uncertain in the way that good people get when they run into a wall they didn't see coming. By the time my shift ended, the kitchen had mostly emptied out. Martha was wiping down the counters with the slow, methodical strokes of someone who had done it 10,000 times and had no intention of rushing now. "You've got company," she said without looking up. I didn't need to ask who. "I'm heading out," she added. "Lock up when you're done." She paused, rag in hand. "You don't have to talk to him." "I know," I said. She looked at me, But avoiding something doesn't make it go away," I said. "It just changes when it catches you." She held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that means fair enough without endorsing the outcome, and walked out. He was leaning against a dark sedan when I pushed through the back door, hands in his coat pockets. Posture relaxed but watchful, the stillness of a man who had learned that waiting was itself a form of control. He straightened when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You're hard to find," he said finally. "I'm not hiding." "No," he said, "you're not." Something in his tone shifted, not accusation, not praise, something between them. "I just want to ask you one question." I waited. "Did you ever wonder what happened to him?" he asked. "After?" I looked at him carefully, really looked, the way I hadn't allowed myself to in the ballroom, the lines in his face, the way even his stillness carried tension, the kind of presence that comes from decades of command and from knowing what calm. "Manned costs." "I try not to," I said. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "He's alive because of you," he said. Something tightened in my chest. That's what they told me back then too. And now I know better than to call it a verdict. He was quiet for a moment, then "You made a choice." Not an accusation, not praise, just a statement of fact. "Yes," I said. "And you never explained why." "No." He stepped closer, not threatening, just closing the distance, the way a man does when the conversation requires honesty and honesty requires proximity. "Why?" he asked. I looked past him toward the road, where the last daylight was going soft and orange. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," I said. Then I heard the falseness of it and shook my head. "No, that's not entirely true. It would have changed how the hospital defended itself. It would have made larger problems visible, decisions made above my level. I chose not to do that. To protect the system. To protect future patients from what I was afraid would happen if the system broke apart badly." I paused. I was probably wrong about that too. He exhaled, the long, controlled breath of a man recalibrating. "I owe you," he said. "You don't." "I do." "You don't," I repeated, and something in my voice finally had an edge to it. He held my gaze, then quietly, "If you had to make that choice again, knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently?" That question went deeper than the others, not because I hadn't asked it myself. I had, every day for years, turning it over in the dark. When I answered, my voice was steady. "No," I said. He nodded once, not surprised, not relieved, just accepting the way a man accepts a truth that costs him something. "I thought so," he said. He stepped back. "Good night." "Good night." I watched him drive away, then stood there for a long time in the cooling air with the silence coming down around me. For years I had told myself the past was over, finished, that the version of me who had stood over that table in that hospital had been formally retired, her name struck from the record. Standing in that parking lot, I understood something different. She had never left. She had just been waiting for the right moment to make herself known. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of what he had said, because of what I had said. "Would you do anything differently?" "No." It had come out certain, steady, but certainty and peace are not the same thing. I lay staring at the ceiling, running the question in different configurations, changing the variables, adjusting the conditions. Every time the answer stayed the same. Every time it felt heavier. The next morning I didn't go straight to work. I drove past the usual turn and kept going. The town gave way to older land, flatter, quieter buildings that hadn't changed much since I'd first moved here. My hands knew where they were going before I'd consciously admitted it. The VA hospital rose out of the landscape the same way it always had, brick a little more worn, parking lot fuller, but essentially unchanged, the same measured, purposeful presence against the sky. I parked across the street, sat there for a while. Then I got out. Inside, the smell found me first, antiseptic coffee, something metallic underneath, unchanged. The lobby had been updated, new chairs and signage, but the feeling was identical, controlled, quiet, the particular efficiency of a place where urgency is managed into routine. No one stopped me, no one recognized me. I had expected that, I had counted on it. I walked down the main hallway past departments I used to move through on autopilot. Radiology, cardiology, the ICU wing. I didn't go all the way there. Instead, I turned down a smaller corridor, the kind most people walk past without registering, and stopped in front of a door I had been inside once before. The conference room. I pushed it open. Empty, long table, a few chairs, a whiteboard with half-erased notes that meant nothing to me. But I could still see it, not the room as it was, but the room as it had been, the people who had sat where no one sat now, the voices overlapping, the tension that had filled the air like barometric pressure before a storm. 2 charts on the table, 2 lives, 1 decision. We don't have enough resources. Or 3 is occupied. We can transfer. No time. Which patient has better odds? That question and the way it had narrowed everything. I stood there long enough that the memory stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like the room itself. Then I wondered if you'd come back. I turned. He was in the doorway, the general, not in uniform, never in uniform outside of my imagination. Just a dark coat, silver hair, the posture that was simply part of him. You followed me, I said. No, he said, I just know where this road leads. He came inside, stood on the other side of the table. For a moment we were simply there, 2 people connected to the same evening by different threads, standing in the room where it had begun. You knew Earl Patterson, I said, it wasn't a question. Yes. How? He was quiet for a moment, then he saved my life once. The words landed slowly. I looked at him. He was a mechanic. He was, the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. He pulled me out of a burning vehicle when I couldn't move, took shrapnel doing it, never wrote it up, never sawed a metal, said metals were just metal and paperwork. A quiet sadness moved across his face. That was Earl. I looked at the table where the charts had been. He didn't have a chance, I said quietly, not that night. The general was still for a moment, then he had you. That wasn't enough. No, he agreed, but it wasn't nothing either. We stood there in the empty room, 2 people bound to the same moment by different angles of grief. Outside, the hospital continued its quiet work, life being managed, loss being managed, decisions being made by people who would carry them home. I told them it was my decision, I said after a while. In the report, I said I made the call alone. He turned his head slightly. You didn't. I know. That's not what I know what you meant, I said, and you're right, you were in that doorway. You asked me which one had a better chance, but the report didn't need your name, it needed mine, and I gave it. Silence. You didn't have to take it all, he said. Yes, I said, I did. I looked at the whiteboard, at the ghost of a diagram someone had drawn for some other meeting on some other day. They needed someone to be responsible. I was responsible. What would have been the point of dividing it? He didn't argue, not this time. What are you going to do now? He asked. The question felt different from the others, less about the past, more like a door opening. I thought about the kitchen, the sink, the particular piece of repetitive work and no expectations, the small, honest life I'd built from the pieces that were left. I don't know, I said. He nodded, as if that were the right answer, as if only people who didn't know were still capable of going somewhere. As I turned to leave, he said, there's something you should know. I stopped. Earl made a request before he lost consciousness, he said. He asked us, anyone who was there, not to let anyone else pay for what happened. The room went very quiet. I didn't turn around, I couldn't quite. I just stood there with my hand on the door frame, feeling the weight of a kindness I had never been ready to receive. Then I nodded once and walked out. That night, for the first time in years, I opened the drawer. It was at the back of the closet, inside a shoebox I had moved 3 times across 3 apartments. I had always known exactly where it was. I had simply made a practice of not knowing. The envelope was yellowed at the edges. My name was written on the front in careful, deliberate handwriting, not elegant, just precise, like every letter had required effort and the effort had been considered worth it. No title, not doctor, just my name. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on low and the rest of the apartment dark. A truck passed slowly outside, its headlights dragging across the wall and disappearing. I held the envelope for a long time. Then I opened it. A single page, a few short lines written plainly without dramatic language. Earl Patterson had composed this or asked someone to compose it for him before the final surgery. He had known his odds, he had understood what doctors faced in rooms like that one. And near the end, a sentence I had read once years ago and folded away so quickly the paper nearly tore. If it comes down to me or somebody younger, don't let them waste it on an old man who's already had his turn. I put the letter down. The apartment was very quiet. I pressed both palms flat against the table. For years I had carried blame because blame at least gave shape to loss. Blame meant the story made sense, I made a decision, someone died, I paid the price. Clean, containable, a punishment I could build a life around the edges of. But that letter complicated everything, it always had. That was why I'd kept it buried. Not because it accused me, because it forgave me. And forgiveness, when you haven't decided you deserve it, can feel crueler than any verdict. Martha found me in the alley before sunrise. I was early by nearly an hour, standing behind the restaurant in the gray pre-dawn, listening to nothing in particular. You sleep here now, she asked. I turned, she was carrying 2 coffees. She handed me one before I could form a response. I couldn't sleep, I said. That makes 2 of us. We stood there in the quiet, sipping from paper cups. The alley smelled of rain and wet cardboard. A delivery truck had left muddy tracks near the service door. Martha had owned this catering company for nearly 30 years, running it with the kind of stubborn competence that comes from outlasting every reason to quit. Her husband had started it as a sandwich counter. When he died, everyone assumed she would sell. She didn't. She kept it open through lean months and broken equipment and brides with impossible expectations. And when she had hired me, no questions, no background investigation, just can you start Monday, I had understood that she was the kind of person who trusted her own judgment over what records could tell her. I owed her more than I had ever said. A hospital called, she said. My hand tightened around the cup. They called here. They called me because the family asked where you worked. I didn't give them anything personal. Thank you. She looked at me sideways. They already know enough, don't they? Not a question. We stood in silence for a while. A bird started up somewhere nearby. The sky was shifting from black to a bruised, uncertain blue. You want to tell me who you used to be? Martha asked. Not particularly, I said. That's fair, a pause, but maybe you ought to tell yourself. By noon I was at the sink. Work helped, it always had. The body understands labor in a way it doesn't understand grief. Soap, water, plates, silverware, things that came in dirty and went out clean. Simple causality in a world that was otherwise short on it. Around 3, the back door opened. Daniel's brother stood there, and beside him the general. Martha positioned herself between them and the kitchen like a woman who had decided the kitchen was a sovereign state. We're closed for private prep, she said. We won't stay long, the general said. That's what people say. A faint smile, I understand. I dried my hands and came around the sink. It's all right. Martha stepped aside, not far, that was Martha. The brother looked like a man who had not left the hospital in 36 hours. His eyes were red, but his posture had softened, the particular softening of someone who has moved from fear into something more uncertain and more bearable. "He's awake," he said. I absorbed those words before I understood them. "Daniel, awake." He nodded. He asked what happened. "We told him a woman from the kitchen helped him." He paused. "Then you told him too much," I said. "No," the general said quietly, "not enough." He reached into his coat and placed something on the steel prep table between us. A photograph. Old, slightly faded at the corners, the kind of photograph that has been carried somewhere, a wallet, a drawer, a shoebox, without being displayed. A younger version of the general stood beside a man I recognized, though it took me a moment to place why. Both men were dusty, worn, smiling the way soldiers smile when the worst part of the day is behind them. Between them stood a woman in surgical scrubs, hair pulled back, face half turned from the camera. "May." I stared at it. "I don't remember this," I said. "I know," the general said. "You weren't meant to. It was taken after the convoy attack. You were attached to the forward surgical team for 3 weeks." I looked at the man beside him in the photograph. Earl. "He kept this," the general said. My throat tightened. He never told me. "He didn't talk about what mattered to him," the general said. "He thought it was enough to do it." He looked at the photograph for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of the layer of control. "Long before that night in the hospital, all 3 of us stood in the same dust, doing what needed to be done. You saved my life in that field hospital. Then years later, you tried to save the man who had saved mine." The kitchen was very still. "That doesn't make me innocent," I said. "No," he said gently, "it makes you human." Those 4 words nearly broke something in me that I had been carefully holding together for a very long time, not because of the praise, because of the mercy in them. I turned back to the sink, put both hands on the edge of the steel, looked at my reflection. For years I had worn guilt like a sentence, deserved, legible, clarifying. It had given shape to the loss in a way that nothing else had. But standing there with that photograph on the table and Earl Patterson's face looking up from 3 decades ago, I felt something more frightening than guilt. I felt the possibility that my story was not as finished as I had made it. And I didn't know what to do with that. I asked them to leave the photograph. Not because I was ready to pick it up, because I wasn't ready to let it leave. The general nodded as if he understood. Daniel's brother glanced back at me once from the door. Martha watched them go with her arms crossed, her face doing nothing. When the door shut, the kitchen settled around me again. Martha came to stand beside the table and looked down at the photograph for a moment. "Well," she said quietly, "that explains your knife skills." Something almost like. A laugh moved through me, almost. She didn't smile, neither did I for a while. We simply stood there, 2 women past the age of pretending silence always needs to be filled. Then she said, "You planning to run again?" "Again? Don't act like you haven't been running since the day I hired you." I wanted to deny it, but Martha was not a woman you lied to when you respected her. "I didn't know what else to do," I said. She nodded once. "That's different from not having a choice." I looked at the photograph. My younger face looked back, half-turned, unaware of everything coming after. I barely recognized her, not because she looked so different, but because she still believed that usefulness and worth were the same thing. "I made the call," I said. "I know." "No, Martha, you don't." My voice sharpened before I could soften it. "People keep trying to make it into something noble. It wasn't noble. I stood there with 2 lives in front of me and I chose. 1 man lived, 1 man died. That is not redemption, that is blood math." Martha didn't flinch. "No," she said, "it's not redemption." She picked up a towel and folded it slowly, giving her hands something to do while her mind worked. "But I've run this place long enough to know something about choosing when there isn't enough," she continued. "When the register can only carry 1 salary and 2 people need hours, you pick one. Smaller stakes, but the feeling is the same. Somebody always pays. That doesn't make it right, I said. No, she agreed, but it makes it real. That was Martha, no comfort she didn't believe in, no easy grace, just truth laid down flat like a foundation you could stand on, even if you didn't like where it put you. By 5:00 p.m., Martha came back holding the office phone. For you. Who is it? Hospital. My first instinct was to say no. My second instinct was worse, it was to listen. I took the phone. Hello? Is this Elena Hart? I hadn't heard my full name spoken in that tone in years, the professional, careful voice, the voice of someone who has been asked to make a delicate request on behalf of someone else. Yes. This is Claire Benton, patient advocate at St. Anselm. Mr. Daniel Mercer has asked to speak with you. I'm not family. He knows. I'm not his doctor. He knows that too. A pause and then softer, he said he won't ask again. That was unfair, or maybe it wasn't. I looked across the kitchen. Martha stood near the stove, pretending not to listen and listening to every word. I'll come after my shift, I said. Martha pointed at the door before I'd even hung up. Go now. I have 2 hours left. And I have 6 people who can wash dishes badly until close. Martha, don't make me fire you just to get you moving. So I went. The hospital room was dim when I arrived. Daniel lay propped against pillows, bruised by machines and everything that had happened, but more present than I had expected. His brother was at the window. The general stood and stepped back when I came in. Daniel turned his head. For a moment neither of us spoke, then he said, "You look different." So do you. His mouth moved toward a smile that didn't quite have the strength to arrive. They told me you saved me. I helped until the paramedics came. That sounds like something a person says when they don't like being thanked. It's something a person says when it's accurate. He studied me. I remember you, he said. From the VA, pieces mostly, your voice mainly, it was calm. I looked at my hands. He took a slow breath. My father told me about that night, years ago, not everything. Enough, I said. The general's face tightened slightly, but he didn't speak. Daniel looked at the ceiling. I spent a long time angry at you. I know. You don't know, he said. No, I said, you're right, I don't. He was quiet for a moment. I thought you'd decided I was worth more. There it was, the center of it, the ugly, honest truth of it. I looked at him directly. I didn't. I know that now. No, I said quietly. You need to hear me say it. I didn't choose you because of your name or your father or what your future might be. I made the decision I believed gave both patients the best available chance under conditions that shouldn't have existed, and I was wrong about part of it. His eyes were wet, though his voice held steady. Which part? I thought I could carry it alone. The general looked away. Daniel swallowed. My brother wants to file suit, he said. I looked at the window. His brother didn't deny it. That's your choice. We'd need your testimony. There it was, the real reason, one of the real reasons. I felt the old fear rise, not of consequences, not even of shame, but of being pulled back into rooms where truth becomes whatever the powerful can afford to shape, where words are weapons, where the past gets rearranged to serve the present. Daniel watched me carefully. I won't ask you to ruin your life again, he said. You might not have to ask. The general stepped forward. Elena. I turned to him. You've paid more than your share, he said. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made something in me harden. My share, I said. Earl died. Daniel carried guilt he didn't earn. Your family held a story that never got told. The hospital protected its reputation. And I spent years hiding in a kitchen because hiding was easier than standing somewhere public and saying, I did the best I could, and the best I could was not enough, and the system that put me in that position was broken, and no one wanted to fix it. Silence. I looked at Daniel. I'll testify, I said. His brother stood straighter. But not for revenge, I added. I won't let Earl become a weapon, I won't let me become a saint, and I won't pretend the past becomes clean because a room finally hears it. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. What do you want then? I looked at the machines beside his bed, the steady lines, the fragile proof that life was still happening. I want the truth recorded somewhere it can't be buried again. For the first time, the general's face changed, not shock, not pride, but something quieter. The look of a man who has been carrying grief for a long time and has just found a place to set some of it down. That night, walking to my car, the air felt colder than before. I had spent years believing silence was my punishment, my due, my contribution to the logic of consequences. Now I was beginning to understand it had also been my protection. And stepping out of it would cost me something, maybe more than I had budgeted for. But some debts don't ask whether you're ready. They simply come due. The hearing wasn't held in a courtroom. The hospital's legal team had requested an internal review panel, 3 physicians, 1 administrator, 1 outside observer. Quiet, controlled, recorded but not public. Part of me was relieved, part of me understood exactly why they wanted it that way. Truth is easier to manage when fewer people are listening. I wore the same jacket I wore to work, no statement, just something that felt like mine. The room was smaller than I remembered, or I was remembering the wrong room. There had been so many of them, conference tables, fluorescent lights, chairs arranged for decisions no one wanted to own. Daniel sat at the far end, pale but upright, his brother beside him. The general stood near the wall, hands behind his back, watching. When I took the empty seat across from the panel, no one announced me. The administrator spoke first, polite, procedural. Thank you for coming, we'd like to review the events of. I know what you'd like, I said gently. Let's not waste time pretending this is about clarification. A flicker across his face. One of the physicians, older, gray-haired, the kind of face that had heard most things, leaned forward. Then tell us what you believe it is about. Responsibility, I said, and what we're willing to admit about how it gets assigned. They asked their questions, I answered them plainly, no defensiveness, no performance. 2 patients, limited resources, 1 decision. They circled back to protocol, to guidelines, to the framework that makes hard choices look structured on paper. I didn't dispute the framework, I told them where it broke. You had a triage system, I said. It favored projected survival rates, it favored patients with fewer complications. It also, unofficially, favored patients whose outcomes mattered more to the institution. The administrator shifted. That's an unfair characterization. It's an incomplete one, I said, but not unfair. I looked at Daniel. At the time, I believed departing from protocol might give both men a chance. I was wrong. That failure belongs to me, but so does the decision not to accept that the outcome was predetermined by policy. The gray-haired physician studied me, knowing what you know now, same situation, different room, same call. Yes, I said. Daniel's brother inhaled. The administrator looked almost satisfied, as though that answer confirmed something he wanted on the record. But the physician didn't move on. Explain. Because the decision wasn't about choosing one life over another, I said. It was about refusing to let the system decide without challenge. I took the path I believed gave both men a chance. I failed one of them. That failure belongs to me, but so does the refusal to accept that his death was inevitable before I entered the room. The outside observer, a woman who had said nothing until now, leaned forward. Why didn't you say this before? That question mattered more than any of the others. I told myself it wouldn't change anything, I said. That's not entirely true. It would have changed how the hospital defended itself. It would have exposed decisions made above my level. I chose not to do that. Why? She asked. Because I was tired, I said, and because I believed PR. Audicting the institution might protect future patients better than dismantling it. I was probably wrong about that too. The room absorbed this. They brought up Earl Patterson's letter. The administrator slid a copy across the table. We obtained this from his records. It indicates he expressed a preference regarding treatment prioritization. I didn't reach for it, I've read it. And you didn't include it in your original report. No. Why not? Because a patient's willingness to sacrifice himself doesn't remove a physician's responsibility to try. The gray-haired physician nodded slowly, consistent with medical ethics. Also consistent with guilt, I said. When the questions ended, the administrator folded his hands. The panel will deliberate and issue a statement. I stood. I'm not here for a statement. He blinked. Then why are you here? I looked at Daniel. For him, I said, and for the record. The outside observer spoke one last time. What do you want the record to reflect? I took a breath. That the system failed 2 patients that night, not just one. That responsibility was narrowed to a single decision because it was easier than examining the structure that created it. And that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't prevent harm, it just determines who carries it. Afterward, Daniel came to me slowly. You didn't clear your name, he said. That wasn't the goal. They're still going to say you were wrong. I was wrong, I said. He held my gaze, not the way they mean. His brother stepped forward. We're not filing the lawsuit. I looked at him. Why? He glanced at Daniel. Because there's nothing a settlement fixes. No, there wasn't. The general waited until the others had gone. When he finally spoke, his voice was the quietest I'd heard it. You gave him back his life twice, he said. I gave him time, I said. What he does with it is his. He nodded. That's more than most people get. We walked out together, not as allies, not as strangers, something that didn't have a name yet, which felt about right. A week later, I went back to work. Same sink, same plates, same rhythm, nothing about the kitchen had changed. But I had. Not in any way visible from the outside, just something in the way I stood at the water, the way the work felt in my hands, less like punishment, more like honest labor. Something had shifted in how I occupied the space. Martha handed me an envelope mid-morning. No return address, she said. Inside, a short note, no signature, a single line in careful, deliberate handwriting. You did what I couldn't ask you to do. I knew who it was from. There was also a check. I left it in the envelope. Money doesn't settle debts like that. That evening after closing, I stayed behind. The kitchen was quiet in the way it gets when the day has been fully used, not abandoned but completed. I stood at the sink with my hands resting on the edge, looking at the reflection in the steel. For years I had looked at that reflection and seen only what was missing. The title, the career, the version of myself who moved through the world with authority and certainty, and the clean confidence of someone who had not yet been required to find out what they were made of when everything went wrong. Now I saw something else. Not redemption, not absolution, just continuity, a life that had not ended when the other life did, a life that had changed shape and in doing so had perhaps grown more honest. If you've come this far, I won't tell you what to think about what I did. I won't ask you to decide if I was right or wrong. Life doesn't divide itself that cleanly, no matter how much we need it to. But I'll tell you this. There will be a moment, maybe there has already been one, when you won't have enough information, enough time, or enough certainty to make a perfect choice. And you'll have to choose anyway. When that moment comes, I hope you choose with as much care as you can carry. And I hope you find a way to live with what it costs. Because the cost is real, and the person who pays it is always you. But so is the person who gets to keep going afterward. Thank you for listening.